Hi, my name is Liz Irvine and I am the Scottish Trustee for the u3a. And welcome to these two videos that you're about to have a look at. And the two videos were made by the u3a on positive ageing, alongside looking at various issues raised by departments in our Scottish universities as to what makes for a positive u3a experience. And I think the findings from the projects and the various discussions would be that the u3a provides informal learning, provides stimulation, provides friendship, and takes away from loneliness, which can often happen in later life. And the u3a is a very positive way to look at going on in later life. And so we really just hope that you'll enjoy both the videos, and thank you very much for showing an interest in them. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Susan Murray. I'm Director of the David Hume Institute, and I'm delighted to be chairing this discussion today for u3a on positive ageing. I'm joined by some colleagues who will talk to you in a second as we introduce this session. So, Melanie, will you start us off, please? Tell us who you are and also what you think about positive ageing.
I'm Dr. Melanie Lovatt. I'm a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Stirling. For me, the most helpful part of the term positive ageing is that it's a rejection of a deterministic conceptualization of ageing as something that is inevitably going to lead to decline, deterioration, and disengagement. The note of caution I would introduce to the term positive ageing is that we have to be careful not to stigmatise people who are seen as deviating from a positive way of ageing due to reasons which are beyond the control relating to financial inequalities, disability, health, etc. So that's my introduction of a bit of critical thinking about how we think about the term positive ageing.
Thanks, Melanie. Coming to you, Sandi.
Yes, hello, I'm Sandi Rickerby. I am the North East Regional Trustee for the u3a. I chair the National Research Committee and also the Pushback Ageism campaign. For me, I am in the process, I hope, of positive ageing. And for me, it's a time to be who you are, to develop skills that you didn't have when you were working necessarily, or to continue to use skills that you had when you were working, to feel valued and to feel that you have something to offer, but equally that there's something out there for you and you're not just looking forward to your body and mind falling to pieces.
Thanks, and Dwight.
Hi, I'm Dwight Tse, lecturer in psychology at the University of Strathclyde. And to me, positive psychology is the recognition and the acknowledgement of the possibilities of our lifelong trajectories from away from the deterministic view of inevitable decline to a potential of growth and continuous development. And we know how this deterministic view of decline actually may paralyze us from doing anything to improve our life, and we want to avoid that. And I think positive aging is helping us recognizing this opportunity for us to keep on growing and thriving lifelong. And one caveat I want to put here is that it's not wishful thinking. Positive aging is something that we need to strive for. We provide this possibility for ourselves. So it's requiring a lot of effort, actually, to go for it. So I would say that while we're rejecting the deterministic view of decline, we need to put this effort in to make sure that we are putting it into a good trajectory.
So what are the things that would get in the way of a mindset, looking forward positively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to me, I think one of the potential outcomes of that is probably the recognition of sufficient challenge in your life. So when we're talking about it in psychology, we try to make a distinction between challenge and threat. Both of them seems to be a little bit of coming up to you in your face, but at the same time, if we see it as a threat, this is something that is harmful to our well-being, and we are trying our best way to avoid that. While we are looking at challenge, they could be seen positively, so that we are thinking of ways to overcome it, the things that we can do to increase our capacity and our skill sets to make ourselves a better person at the same time, but at the same time also to overcome those stressors. So I think the recognition of having sufficient challenge beyond the formal kind of education and training that you have maybe in the earlier stage of your life, and to continue your way of learning, maybe in a non-formal way or continuously through your lifespan. And that is something that I think it's important for us to recognize.
Thanks, Dwight. So both Sandi and Melanie, you mentioned different aspects of positive ageing, and I'm kind of things that might get in the way of the kind of things that Dwight's mentioned. You know, there's if you're financially secure. I mean, Melanie, you mentioned it, and if you're worried about how to put food on your table or heat your home, it's really hard to look forward and stay active learning. Or are there other things that you think are more? Which are the biggest barriers to staying positive in as you get older?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think financial, economic inequalities, which then relates to your ability to access sufficient health, quality and safe accommodation. So while I agree with you that there is an individual element to this, as a sociologist, I'm always interested in that relationship between individual agency and what it's possible for people to do, but also the broader social structures that can either enable them or hinder people from realising that. So I think provision of good quality public services is absolutely crucial to allow people to flourish and have the lives and later life that they want to have.
I think one of the problems as well is isolation. Often when you retire, you lose a lot of your contacts, a lot of your friendship group, and can become quite isolated. People often have lost their partners and so on, and so there's that kind of lack of confidence that comes with that, and also not knowing what's available, what's out there, what there is that they can access at any time. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big issue as well. And also this kind of fear that learning means academic and working for qualifications, and that kind of pressure, which people generally don't want. Though I know some do, go and do PhDs and things, but it's that sort of informal learning new skills of any sort, not necessarily academic learning.
One of the things we've seen in the most recent Office for National Statistics data that's come out is the number of over 65s returning to work, part-time, but still 30 hours and less. So some of them are doing a substantial amount of work. Now, the theory is, because it's quite a new trend, that's been driven by the cost of living. But one upside of that, from what Sandi's saying, is that loss of isolation, being connected to the workforce again, might be positive. Or are there two sides to that?
There's another important aspect of that, really. It's about having a purpose. When you're retired, life's one long holiday, isn't it? Without any sort of shape or form or purpose. And to have a structure and a purpose to your day is something that you get from working. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably draws some people. They don't know what to do. They haven't got the skills to move themselves forward and access whatever is available.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder if that trend continues and more people over 65 either return to or stay in paid employment, whether we'll see that has a knock-on effect on the provision of informal care. Because as we know, many older people provide informal care both to parents, because that they might still have parents who are alive, to spouses, and also obviously to grandchildren. So there's a huge amount of care being done for free by older people. So it'll be interesting to see if that's affected and if strains start to show as a result of people returning to or staying in paid work.
I see it as also an opportunity, but at the same time, some concerns related to that as well. And purpose is a very important aspect of work life, and the post-retirement life could be seen as some longer term of like maybe a holiday to some people, but at the same time, we know that like having some sense of purpose, some sense that you can look forward to, something that you can work as a greater goal beyond oneself is actually a very important aspect of well-being. So having that part to continue to the later stage of life is actually quite important. But at the same time, I'm also aware that like having that trend to become longer, we are pushing our norm of how we consider our later life can be. And I think the key here is to having this autonomy being at the hand of the actual person. We are not asking people to work longer because they have to, because of the cost of living that they need to face. We need to give back the autonomy to them such that they are not working because like life makes them that they have to do it. Rather, it could be an option that if people want to work longer for something that they are passionate about, feel free to do that. But at the same time, if people say, I want to take a break and I want to enjoy my life a little more than my work, that's also okay as well. So the key is whether we are considering it as something that is compulsory, everybody has to do it, versus something that we are providing additional option for people to choose.
There are two things that come up in my head when you're all talking. One is the healthy life expectancy, because some people are physically not able to work as long because they're things are happening in their body in their, say, 50s. So working to the age of 65 or beyond is just not feasible for some. But the other thing is volunteering. So Sandi, you mentioned a package of things people do to be active and have a routine after they retire. And for many years, volunteering was seen to be something where there was a mass army of volunteers, of people that had retired. And as soon as you retired, you looked at the menu of who was recruiting for volunteers. And I can see that being squeezed. So years ago, I worked on volunteering strategy in Scotland, and people would regularly retire at 55, and that's now becoming less and less common. But that would be who you'd be recruiting, and you could have 20 years from a volunteer. It was amazing. You just don't get that now because people are retiring later, or as you said, Melanie, the calls on people's time, particularly for childcare or elder care, it's much more squeezed. I was thinking about this before. I feel a bit like a squeezed generation in that middle at either end of care. But actually, 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds are if they've still got 90-year-old parents. So there's a lot of people feeling quite squeezed at the moment. Or is that you're nodding?
Yeah, I'm nodding because I'm currently part of a research project at the University of Stirling, which is. It's all about designing homes as we age, so it's for healthy cognitive ageing. And we're currently trying to recruit people in later life to get their perspectives on how they inhabit their home. And we're having problems with recruiting because exactly the same reason. People in later life are fitting in childcare, volunteering all kinds of activities. So we've had some people have to postpone, rearrange, cancel interviews because of other commitments to their time. So I think it's a bit of a myth, just thinking, there's this huge pool of participants waiting to be recruited, twiddling their thumbs because they're not in paid work anymore. It's just not the case.
I've certainly heard people say they feel like once they retired, they have no idea how they had time to work because they're just so busy. But that's not for everyone. You must see in the roles you've got the different sides of that coin.
Yes, you do. And people, that's something people often say to me, I don't know how you can be bothered doing all that. But for me, it's important to have the opportunity to live a busy and fulfilled life. I would go crazy if I was just stuck at home. But I think that brings up another important question there, is where you actually live, the type of housing you live in, and whether that supports you to live a healthy lifestyle or not. And I mean healthy in the widest sense of the word. Some people are stuck in their houses, really, and in unsuitable housing as well. And I think that lack of choice in housing is, as you get older, often people don't want to stay in a great big house, would like something smaller, but there isn't something suitable, and that brings many problems as well, I'm sure.
I agree with the importance of understanding the environment that people are living in, and that physical environment aspect is actually very quite related to the social environment that people are in as well. I imagine that you're in a more rural area with very limited transportation option, then the option of you like going to visit your friends or visit your relatives, it's very, very limited compared to people who have more better mobility options that they have in that environment. So, and we know how important it is to maintain a tight social circle and having some good relationship with friends and family. So like the many aspects are actually intertwining with one another, and that issue of inequality and the issue of not having the good housing environment is actually not just an older age aspect that people are looking at, but it's actually lifelong. As we can see, it tends to be carryover from the younger life all the way to the older aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. There's also that question of family having moved away, children going away for jobs, and that, again, almost you lose your place in society. And I think that need to belong is an important one, isn't it? So you need to feel that you belong to some sort of group and have your place in it. And again, that's something that's threatened as you get older.
Do you see a difference between men and women in that sense?
Yes, a huge difference. Women are much more prepared to go out and join things. Men don't. Men tend to do sort of standard things like walking and playing golf and doing the garden, but they don't join other kinds of groups. And often things like organisations like u3a are, heavily weighted towards women. The members, I would think probably 75% are women. And yet the men who do join these things really enjoy it. But often they go along with a wife or a neighbour or somebody in the first place. And again, it's that confidence to go and seek out what it is you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know my dad definitely went along with my mum when he joined the u3a. There's no way he would have crossed the threshold on his own. But he did go to men's sheds on his own. And I think that environment has been quite a different feeling, I think. One of the things Dwight just touched on there, and I think you did a bit, Melanie, is some of the changes that are coming through, partly because of cost of living, but partly because of COVID, and partly because people's lives are changing. But we're seeing an increase in the number of intergenerational, multi-generational households. So people realising that they can actually pool resources and maybe have a better quality of life than if they lived separately. However, it does involve a lot of compromise. And I wonder, that can be really hard, particularly when you've been living on your own, or you've been living, in a certain way and you've got exactly how you want to do. And so the households I know that have come together, there have been a couple of years of negotiation at the beginning of how to do things. Do you recognise any of that? Or
I think if it works, then obviously that's great for the people involved, and I'm sure there are situations in which it does work, and there are many benefits from living in a multi-generational house. The problem is when it's not out of choice, but it's forced upon you because the cost of rent, the cost of housing is too great. So when that is forcing people into living with members of the family that they wouldn't choose to, and that can create all kinds of tensions. And it's that is not something that we should be aspiring to having these multi-generational households out of forced circumstances rather than choice.
And I agree with that as well. And I think like many of the research that we have looked at into intergenerational or multi-generational community, people are put in there voluntarily versus like because of cost of living, because of other reasons that people are forced to be like stay in under the same roof. So I think that is a key importance. And the second one is probably the recognition of that path. It's not always rosy. And we need to admit that like it takes time for people to come along together within the same generation. So even for across generations, that kind of tension may exist. The question is how we can support those cooperation and the co-living arrangements can be sustainable in the long run, if that is something that we want to pursue, as we are seeing that a lot of the intergenerational contact that we are seeing, it's somehow decreasing from time to time with the current living arrangements. So I guess like the idea of having some kind of expectation control, saying that like this is something that we can work on together at the same time. We also need to focus on like giving people the autonomy and choices that they can live together if they want, but if not, there could be some other options that people
Yeah, there's quite an interest, I think, in co-housing. Not necessarily intergenerational, but older people getting together and sharing big houses and things, I think. Quite a move towards that, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so, some people say that is a very positive way forward in terms of the housing needs.
Yeah.
And it's not just about putting people under the same roof. If we look at those multi-generational housing or community program, they actually have some additional support in there. They're organizing some events that including both of those generations together. They are looking for some religious group could support the daily living of one generation to another. They also have some community activities coming in. So I would say that it's more than simply putting people in one place. It takes quite a lot of effort from the structural level and societal level to make it work.
I'm quite interested. So one of the things I learned when I was preparing for this is that the u3a is open to people of all different ages. Not just, you don't have to retire and wait to join. There are a whole menu of things you could do if you're not in full-time work. Do you want to just say a little bit about that? Because I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, as you say, it's just no longer in full-time employment. We do get some younger members, possibly, not very young, but in their 40s or thereabouts, who are working part-time or for whatever reason aren't working. We do get some, but it's a small minority at the moment. And I think part of that's just lack of awareness. They don't know that u3a exists and what it can offer. Yeah.
I remember when I was off on maternity leave and there were some local walks in the community near where I was, but I wasn't allowed to join them because I wasn't over 50. And I was that's ageist. Surely that's ageist. Why have they got funding? But then it made me think a lot about funders and what funders will fund and what they won't fund. And it was a mixed walking group probably wouldn't have got funding, but they would fund intergenerational something else. I find that quite an interesting sort of dichotomy there, that how people manage to get things done or not done.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. And in some a recent project I was working on called Reimagining the Future in Older Age, we had what we called intergenerational reading groups with adults of different ages. And we got them reading novels which featured themes of ageing, intergenerational relationships, the future, as a prompt to think how we can reimagine these kinds of relationships. And having initially talked about the themes in the books, conversations then spiraled into a desire on the part of adults of all ages to be able to spend more time with each other. But what was interesting was that most people rejected kind of contrived intergenerational activities. What they wanted instead was just the space and time and freedom to be able to get together for shared activities, which could be walking, it could be reading, it could be all kinds of crafting, and have accessible in terms of finance, in terms of disability, in terms of time, spaces to be able to get together and meet over these shared interests rather than it be billed as an intergenerational activity, which puts some people off.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we can see anecdotally from other research programs that if we are focusing on merely having this intergenerational contact for the sake of intergenerational contact, that is not working. What we need is, like you said, space and time for people having some shared interests to work together, regardless of their ages. So another concept that I want to introduce here as well, it's we are focusing mostly, when we talk about intergenerational contact, their biological age, how old they are. But then in the idea of in psychology, we also talk about the subjective age that people feel, how old they are. And it can vary from day to day. Some days people may feel a little younger because of the certain activities that they do. And I think that is another aspect that is important to recognize as well, that biological age or chronological age is only a number. It's conveying a lot of norms and attitudes to a particular age group, but that's not all that define us. What defines us is how we think we are, and for more importantly, what we think we can contribute to others and how others can connect with us. So I think these ideas of going beyond the stress and emphasis on biological age is something that we need to work together in that intergenerational context.
I'm very aware that I would agree with you absolutely that we need to feel that we are valued, we have a valuable place in society, and I think often society's attitude gets in the way of that, where you are, blanketed together as an amorphous mass of old people, and decisions being made on your behalf and rules being imposed across the whole spectrum of people. That's difficult, I think. That can cause people a lot of heartache at times, I'm sure.
And I think lots of the messaging during the pandemic has reinforced that
Absolutely.
sense of a vulnerable population who should stay at home and not come out until help is at hand. So I think that just exacerbated that existing stigma.
A lot of them seems to be benign at the surface. Like it seems like it's for your own good, so stay inside. But at the same time, we can also see the implications it brings, like how it can turns out to be like maybe hostile to some of the age groups, and how these like in the social media, how that kind of reactions to a specific age group can turn really ugly. It could happen that way as well.
I think there's some interesting research that's been done by critical gerontologists who critically examine this term vulnerability, and instead of rejecting it, they turn it on its head and say, well, throughout our life course, whatever age we are, whatever circumstance we're in, we can all feel vulnerable. So it's something that we should acknowledge and not reject out of hand. The problem is when it's uncritically used as a label to stigmatise and marginalise and objectify particular groups. I can see why people's hackles raise at being labelled vulnerable, but actually I think we might be better off if we all recognise that vulnerability is just a part of being human. And then from there, think about how we can support each other and have interdependency rather than sort of seeing independence as the aim and dependence as something to reject. Look at interdependence and how we can support each other.
Just in case anyone's listening, that's quite a long word, gerontology.
Gerontology.
Do you want to explain what that means?
It's really the study of ageing on older people. So I'm a sociologist, but I draw on also disciplines of anthropology, critical gerontology, social gerontology. So gerontology is focused on ageing.
Right. Fantastic. Sorry, I'm really interested because I want to make sure that this is accessible as possible to people from all different backgrounds. And I think that's something we've maybe not come into the conversation. Do you see a difference with people from different places, different bits of Scotland, or from further afield? Do people age in different ways in different places? Like, are you more likely to interact if you live in a town in the rural area? Or, or are there different levels of isolation or anything like that you want to bring into the conversation? Because I'm really aware we've talked quite holistically so far.
Yeah. I mean, you just mentioned then, Sandi, very often older people are sort of branched together, grouped together as this homogenous group. So I don't know if you wanted to expand on that.
I was aware I was doing that in the conversation so far. I was like, right, let's segment it.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one, really. I think where you live does certainly influence. If you live in a rural area with a poor bus service and you can't get about to places, and you perhaps have very poor broadband and you can't connect digitally, or don't have the equipment, whatever it is, then you're not going to age as successfully as somebody who can access these things, I'm sure. And also, I'm not quite sure, really. Society's not equal, of course it isn't. And I don't know whether that influences your ability, as it were, to go out and find things and age successfully. It shouldn't, but I think in practice it probably does.
So by that you mean if you've got a job perhaps where you're used to speaking to people, you're more able to go out than someone that perhaps is, not dealing with people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's not easy to go out and find things, particularly if you're on your own.
And I would agree that as well, like the living arrangement part is actually dominant in quite a few of like how we maintain our social relationships with other people around us. And coming from another cultural background and growing up from somewhere else, I also realized like how like culture shapes our aging process as well, and how different cultural codes actually embedded in our society. It's actually influencing since you're young, but then if you think about like how long that you have been in society and how long they actually affect your feelings and thoughts, and ultimately to the older age, then you are seeing much more of those cultural differences as well. Then you can see like some culture tends to have a more disengaged model for older adults. They tend to be seen as someone who needs to be kept safely and protected from outer hazards, like they have to stay at home for the holidays, versus some cultures may propose more active model of aging, that like older adults should go out and talk more to other people. And many of them, it's not entirely about like whether they are looking at older adults as like being friendly or not. It's really about the different manifestation of how we see best to serve that age group. And at the same time, I also realized that maybe for some people, maybe migrants or maybe people from the minority status, when it comes to the older age, then they will also see that kind of differences with the majority, with the major cultural group to be widened and limited their access into maybe religious practice or maybe like going along, like having friends in the other cultural group in that older community as well. So that could be another challenge for maybe older people with a minority status.
If I could use another term, intersectionality, which is acknowledging that there are many different social identities, social inequalities, divisions that play into a person's experience of a phenomenon, in this case, aging. So whether or not you have a disability, whether or not you have a health issue, if you're from a particular class background, if you're from a particular ethnic background, it doesn't determine your experience of aging, but these factors intersect with each other to shape and influence your experience. And it's also linked to power, so it's related to your ability or the likelihood that you'll be able to flourish in later life, or you might have certain opportunities denied to you because of these different identities and inequalities that intersect with your experience. And it's not just things outside of age, it's within age itself. So many organisations' definitions of an older person start at 50, which is, if you think about the course of a human life and human life expectancies now, you could have 3 different generations of people then classed as older people after the age of 50, with huge variations in people's experience of later life.
Yeah. Melanie has just said, actually kind of reminds me of what Sandi has previously talked about, the gender differences that we see for older people as well. And that intersectionality is kicking in when we are thinking about how man has been socialized to behave and think in one way. And that particular way of living, saying that like having a full-time position and then being in a stable certain occupation and like stay there until retirement may not be like entirely adaptive, I guess, like when it comes to the post-retirement life and when people have to renegotiate what life means to them when they are out of their full-time engagement in a particular occupation. So maybe we're seeing this kind of behavioral differences that like men are less likely to come forward and say like we want to join those kind of activities, non-formal education or non-formal training. That could be one of the reasons behind like that they are being trained or they having this kind of understanding of what the social norms expect them to behave in that sense.
I'm really aware of the time and I'm really enjoying listening to all of you, but I am going to have to wrap it up. But before we do, I'd really like to, if there was one thing that you could leave the audience listening to this with, and particularly focus on the thing that they can do most in their own lives, perhaps around positive aging, or what. Just, I'll leave it. I won't frame it too much. I want to leave it to you. So I'll start with Dwight, because I think I start with Melanie first. So, and then I'll come round. So Dwight, what do you want to leave the audience with today, thinking about?
I would say the term of practical optimism. It is not the wishful thinking that we are saying that like aging process, it's always rosy. Instead, we're thinking about that positive consequences could happen. And it needs us to take effort to really get to the optimal life and flourishing that we want to see. So I guess that is the takeaway that I have.
Thanks. Thanks, Dwight. Sandi?
I think probably I see positive ageing as being a time of opportunity where you can develop aspects of yourself that perhaps you've never have before. And we need to change the mindset away from it being a time when everything's going to start falling apart and that kind of deficit model view of ageing into just a time of great opportunity.
For me, I think it's staying curious and retaining a sense of imagination, how things could be different, both in terms of your own life, well, our own lives as we age, and also how society could be imagined differently, to enable everybody to flourish.
Oh, thank you. That's such a good word to introduce. But right at the end, curious. I think because I can tell this conversation is going to carry on once the cameras are switched off. So I think if I thank each of you for coming today, it's been a really enjoyable discussion. And I think my promise to everyone will always be to remain curious, because I can't stop asking the questions. So thank you ever so much, and I've really enjoyed it. You've given me so much to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.